Imagine this. You've just finished your third drink, or your fifth scroll, or your 10th episode. The screen fades to black, the bottle clinks softly on the table, the high begins to taper, and something in you sinks. Not dramatically, not painfully, just quietly. Like a light dimming in a room you forgot you were sitting in. You check your phone again. Nothing new. You open the fridge. Not hungry. You stare out the window trying to feel something, but everything feels wrapped in plastic. And then it hits you, not a thought but a sensation. You're not craving the drink, or the screen, or the food. You're craving something else entirely, but you don't know what it is. You just know that when it gets quiet, really quiet, something begins to rise. Something unbearable, something hollow, something hungry. And so, you reach again. For the hit, the rush, the distraction, the numbness. Not because you're broken, but because staying present in that hunger feels impossible. Here's the paradox no one tells you. Addiction doesn't begin with the pursuit of pleasure. It begins with the avoidance of pain, especially the pain of meaninglessness. People don't become addicted because they're weak. They become addicted because they are wired for meaning, and meaning is nowhere to be found. And when a life lacks purpose, anything that offers a temporary sense of aliveness will do. So we scroll, we snack, we binge, we buy, we smoke, we gamble, we perform. Not because we're seeking pleasure, but because we're trying to silence the existential ache of disconnection, the dull, unnameable sorrow of a life lived without depth. But what if addiction isn't the problem at all? What if it's a signal, not of dysfunction but of deprivation? What if addiction is the body's final attempt to create feeling in a life that's lost its soul? And if that's true, then the real question isn't, how do I stop? It's, what have I lost? And what am I trying to find every time I reach? Because once you stop looking at addiction as a failure of will and start seeing it as a hijacked search for meaning, the entire story changes. So what exactly is this hidden hunger you keep feeding with dopamine and distractions? And who would you become if you could finally listen to it? Let's go deeper. Addiction is not a moral failing. It is not a weakness of character. It is not merely a chemical dependency. Addiction, in its purest form, is a substitute for meaning. To understand this, you must look past the surface, the substance, the behavior, the dopamine spike, and begin to ask, why does this keep calling me? What part of me is it trying to soothe or replace or silence? Because no one ever wakes up and says, I want to be addicted. What they say, usually without words, is something far more ancient and far more human. I'm overwhelmed. I'm lost. I'm lonely. I'm empty. And I need something, anything that makes me feel whole, even for a moment. And that's where addiction enters, not as a monster, but as a false friend. The psychological setup. Psychologist and trauma expert Gabor Maté famously said, the question is not why the addiction, but why the pain. Addiction is never about the thing itself. It's about what the thing temporarily replaces, the pain you were never allowed to express, the loneliness that's been with you since childhood, the shame that whispers you're not enough, the grief that no one helped you name. These are the psychological roots, and if they remain buried, addiction becomes the only outlet your psyche trusts. The cigarette replaces the silence of abandonment. The scroll numbs the terror of insignificance. The binge replaces the hunger for connection. You are not addicted to the object. You are addicted to relief. The philosophical abyss. Now go deeper. Beyond psychology lies a darker truth, a spiritual vacuum that thinkers like Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and Sartre warned us about long before the internet, opioids, and credit cards. Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how. But what happens when there is no why? When we are taught to consume, to perform, to compete, but never to ask why we exist in the first place? You get a society that's materially rich and existentially bankrupt. You get a world that offers everything except purpose. You get people who seem successful but secretly feel dead inside. And so, addiction becomes the stand-in for transcendence. It mimics the feeling of transcendence, the escape, the rush, the elevation, without ever offering real meaning. But the more you chase that imitation, the further you drift from your own soul. This is not coincidence. This is design. Society's perfect distraction loop. Our culture doesn't just tolerate addiction, it monetizes it. Every app, every algorithm, every industry is built to hook your nervous system. They hijack the very instincts that once helped you survive. Seek novelty, avoid pain, conserve energy, feel safe in the familiar. But now, these instincts are turned against you, trapped in a digital and consumerist loop that offers stimulation in place of fulfillment. And here's the worst part. You start to believe the problem is you, that you're just undisciplined, impulsive, flawed. But the real problem? You're looking for God in a vending machine. You're looking for connection in a feed. You're looking for peace in a pill. You're looking for wholeness in a world that only sells fragments. The split inside you, Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." That's what addiction is. It's the most sophisticated avoidance mechanism ever created. It allows you to feel without facing, to numb without healing, to escape without changing. But here's the paradox. The part of you that seeks the addiction is also the part of you that seeks wholeness. They are not separate. Addiction is the misguided pursuit of meaning in a world that has stripped meaning from your reach. So the question is not how to resist your addiction harder. The question is, how do you return to what it was trying to give you all along without destroying yourself in the process? To answer that, we must first see what addiction has stolen from us, personally, culturally, spiritually, because the damage is deeper than you think. Addiction never arrives with a bang. It doesn't destroy you all at once. It erodes you quietly, gradually, strategically, like waves against a cliff, until one day you look down and realize the ground beneath you is gone. Because the true cost of addiction isn't always found in the obvious tragedies. It's found in what you no longer notice, in what you no longer feel. Let's look at the invisible ruins. The dulling of the soul. Addiction doesn't just numb pain. It numbs everything. Over time, you stop feeling joy the way you used to. Laughter becomes thinner. Beauty loses its edge. Time blurs. Moments that should stir something inside, sunsets, silence, love, music, are met with flatness. Not because you don't care, but because your nervous system is saturated, overstimulated by artificial highs, incapable of responding to subtler truths. This is called anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. But it's not just a clinical term. It's a spiritual crisis. You're not just avoiding pain anymore. You're losing your capacity to receive life. The disappearance of the self-addiction doesn't just take your time. It takes your identity. You become someone you don't recognize. You break promises. You say things you didn't mean. You lie, not just to others, but to yourself. And then you justify it. You build elaborate mental frameworks to protect the addiction, because letting it go would mean facing the raw truth underneath. Over time, this leads to a fracturing, a split between who you are and who you're pretending to be. This is what Jung would call the loss of the self. You're no longer guided by what is meaningful. You're driven by what is manageable. And what's manageable? The next hit, the next scroll, the next escape, the breakdown of relationships. Addiction rewrites your relational blueprint, because when something else becomes the center of your attention, everything else becomes secondary, including the people who love you. Not because you don't care, but because your brain has been rewired to prioritize relief above connection. So you hide, you isolate, you push away the people who get too close, too honest, too real. Intimacy becomes terrifying. Accountability becomes unbearable. And slowly, the people who once held your story are replaced by silence, or shame, or strangers who never ask questions. You don't lose connection all at once. You lose it one avoided conversation at a time. The hijacking of time. Perhaps the cruelest theft is this. Addiction steals your life by disguising itself as just a moment. 5 minutes becomes 2 hours. One night becomes every weekend. A temporary crutch becomes a permanent lifestyle. And while you're numbing the now, your future is quietly being erased. You start to forget your dreams. You stop making plans. You no longer believe in the someday version of yourself, because addiction doesn't live in the future. It lives in the now, but in a warped, shallow, synthetic version of it. You're alive, but you're not living. The cultural consequence, a society of escape, now widen the lens. What happens when millions of people are silently addicted, not just to substances, but to screens, validation, consumerism, rage, noise? You get a culture where distraction is normalized and depth is avoided, where feeling nothing is safer than feeling too much, where we diagnose burnout as a personal failure rather than a symptom of collective collapse. Addiction doesn't just change individuals, it changes civilizations, and it breeds a society that forgets how to feel, forgets how to connect, forgets how to be still long enough to ask, is this really the life I want? The consequences are everywhere, but they're hard to name because they've become the background noise of modern life. We don't see the destruction because we've learned to call it normal. But now that you've seen it, truly seen it, there's no going back. So what's the alternative? If addiction is a hijacked search for meaning, then what happens when you take the wheel back? What does the real search look like? It's time to find out. You don't heal addiction by force. You heal it by reclaiming the path it tried to imitate. Because addiction, for all its destructiveness, points to something real. It's not just a trap, it's a map. And the rebellion begins when you stop punishing yourself for being hooked and start asking, what was I really looking for? That question is not self-help fluff. It's a revolutionary act in a world that conditions you to numb, not feel. So how do you break free? Not just from the behavior, but from the system that made it necessary? Let's begin. Step 1. Interrupt the pattern, not the pain. Your first instinct might be to cut out the addiction cold. Burn the bridge, delete the app, flush the pills, block the dealer. And maybe that's part of it. But if you remove the behavior without meeting the need beneath it, you'll just find a new addiction to fill the void. So the real rebellion isn't abstinence, it's attention. Instead of numbing the urge, sit with it, track it, feel it rise and ask, what are you actually trying to soothe? What are you afraid of feeling? This isn't a technique, it's a practice in self-reunion, and it begins by welcoming the pain you've spent years trying to outrun. Step 2. Create rituals that replace the imitation. Addiction offers a cheap version of what you need: connection, aliveness, transcendence, peace. So your job isn't to destroy the urge, it's to upgrade the ritual. If you crave escape, try awe, nature, music, silence. If you crave connection, try vulnerability, conversations without masks. If you crave stimulation, try creation, writing, painting, dancing. If you crave control, try surrender, meditation, breathwork, prayer. The key is intention. A drink numbs, a ritual reveals. One takes you away from yourself, the other brings you home. Step 3. Redefine strength as sensitivity. In a culture that rewards performance, sensitivity feels like weakness. But here's the paradox. Your sensitivity is not the cause of your addiction. Your sensitivity is what your addiction was trying to protect. The more sensitive you are, the more pain you absorb. But also, the more truth you perceive. So what if you stopped shaming your sensitivity and started honoring it? What if the world wasn't built for your nervous system? Not because you're broken, but because it's broken? Choosing to feel, fully, deeply, honestly, is the most radical form of strength there is, because feeling is what leads to knowing, and knowing leads to healing. Step 4. Tell the truth. Even if your voice shakes, addiction thrives in secrecy. So the most disruptive thing you can do is tell the truth, not just to a therapist, not just to a journal, but to a person who sees you, stays with you, and refuses to look away. Say it. I'm lost. I'm hurting. I don't know how to live without this. I don't want to keep doing this, but I don't know who I am without it. Shame cannot survive in the presence of compassionate witness. Find one. Be one. This is how you break the silence that kept the cycle alive. Step 5. Reconnect with what's real. You don't need a new identity. You need to return to the parts of you that addiction buried. What did you love before the numbing began? What made you feel infinite, even for a moment? What parts of you still ache to be seen, to be useful, to be alive? This isn't about going back. It's about resurrecting what never truly died. Addiction cuts you off from meaning. Healing reconnects you to it. And meaning doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be real. You don't break free by becoming someone else. You break free by remembering who you were before the world taught you to disappear. And when you do, when you stop filling the void and start listening to it, you'll discover something breathtaking. The void was never empty. It was waiting for you. The final truth doesn't scream. It waits. It doesn't arrive in the climax of a detox or the end of a 12-step program. It slips in during the silence, when the cravings fade, when the distractions fall away, when the world stops spinning long enough for you to ask, not how do I stop, but why did I start? That's when it surfaces. The thing no one tells you, the thing buried beneath every substitute, every escape, every hit. Addiction wasn't your enemy. It was your unconscious longing for meaning, dressed in urgency, wired with pain. The real reason you couldn't stop, you weren't chasing pleasure. You were chasing presence, not the rush but the relief, not the high but the hole it momentarily filled. You were trying, desperately, to stitch yourself back together in a world that kept pulling you apart. And the tragic genius of addiction? It mimicked everything you were missing. The thrill of transcendence, the illusion of belonging, the silence of stillness, the relief of forgetting yourself. But it offered them as illusions, fleeting, synthetic, and hollow. You weren't addicted to the thing. You were addicted to the feeling that something finally made sense. Because when life feels meaningless, anything that interrupts that meaninglessness feels like salvation, even if it destroys you. The truth about the void. You were taught to fear the void, to numb it, to fill it, to run from it. But what if the void isn't empty? What if the void is sacred space, not a place of absence, but of potential? The place where meaning is not imposed, but born. The quiet field where your real self, beneath the addictions, beyond the noise, has been waiting patiently. You weren't running from pain. You were running from this silence. Because in this silence, you meet the truth. You are not what you consume. You are not your numbing. You are not your coping. You are not your cravings. You are the one who watches them. The one who's still here, still breathing, still capable of choosing, still whole, even after all this time. The final realization: wholeness was never gone. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But when you finally turn toward that soul, slowly, painfully, honestly, you discover something staggering. You were never broken. You were protecting yourself from a world that offered no answers. Addiction was your shield. Now healing is your sword. Because to recover is not to return to who you were before. It's to become the version of you that no longer needs to hide. A new way of living. So what happens next? You stop chasing highs. You start building depth. You stop running from your feelings. You begin listening to them like ancient messengers. You stop performing your identity. You begin becoming it. And meaning? It doesn't come from above. It's not granted by society, success, or systems. Meaning is handcrafted, forged in presence, lived in moments, born through truth. And your longing for meaning, the very thing addiction hijacked, is still alive. Not as a weakness, but as a compass. You searched in all the wrong places. You hurt yourself trying to feel whole. You lost time. You lost people. You lost yourself. But you never lost your capacity to return. And now you see it. Addiction wasn't a detour. It was your soul refusing to live without depth. So go back. Not to who you were, but to what you've always been becoming. Not broken, not flawed, but aching to feel something real. And now you finally will.